Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires. Yes, just because Curseborn is live on Kickstarter doesn't mean we can't still talk about Vampire the Masquerade, and one of the backers of the World Below backer kit, someone who backed for a physical copy, Antonio, asked me for a video on how to play a member of Clan Tremere. Now, that is a very broad question. I know I always qualify questions by saying that is a loaded question, that's a complex question, that's a broad question. In this case, it's a broad question because it really depends on the kind of character you want to play. And I think this video is going to get into slightly how to play characters that aren't stereotypes, but also the benefit of playing stereotypes. Let's start with that. Vampire the Masquerade and, to an extent, the rest of the World of Darkness has a stereotype problem in that the artwork is so distinctive, especially in Revised Edition and prior, for the clans, that people see that artwork and that is immediately how they create their character. How many of you have seen a Ventrue Stockbroker, have seen a Tremere Librarian, have seen a black American Brujah with a sawed-off shotgun, or a La Sombra with the sound ooh in their name? How many Lucitas, Lucindas, Lucians, Luciuses, Juliuses, and so on have we seen? Julians of Clan La Sombra. And of course they are always dark and shadowy and wearing black. Stereotypes are a problem, but they are also a strength, because Vampire the Masquerade, as an example, has a very clear visual identity, or again, at least it did until Revised Edition. V20 opened things up a little. It was one of the mandates of the game. We really wanted to expand the game in V20, and I think we did a very good job. V5 takes a different direction, and I think while the artwork in V5 is very, very strong, I don't think it informs any kind of stereotype. Stereotype sounds like an incredibly negative word, and I keep using the word problem aside with it, but I don't think stereotypes are always bad things. They are fantastic introductions for players on how to play a character. If a stereotype, a visual representation is strong enough, is distinctive enough, then it starts giving you ideas, and hopefully you will start changing that stereotype to make them a little more interesting. Now, the Tremere have always been stereotyped as academics, bookish, mages in vampire form. Some people might consider the Tremere a cult or a pyramid scheme. Very insular, always looking down at others who haven't drank the Kool-Aid. And that is a stereotype that's been reinforced across multiple editions of Vampire the Masquerade. It's very easy to play a Tremere as other to the rest of the clans, and often the text in Vampire the Masquerade reinforces that, because it's in the first edition, I think it says no Tremere have ever been princes of any cities, at least in North America, and the reason is because they have all this power. Their focus is on something other than politics. Now, that breaks down in subsequent editions, but you later get things like the Tremere are seen with suspicion by everyone because of the clan they diablerized to get where they are now. Others might say that the Tremere are hated by so many clans because of the curses they've laid down on them. There are very many reasons for the Tremere to be other. And I would suggest that to start with, that's actually a pretty good way to look at the clan. It doesn't matter which edition you're playing, it's actually a decent stereotype to lean into. Your Tremere is interested in something that is distinct from the rest of your coterie. This is, of course, going to be different if all of you are Tremere, but I'll get on to that. So, having a Tremere that is interested in something odd is a good way to start. It doesn't have to be blood magic. Your Tremere could be interested in any academic field that is just slightly askew from the mainstream. Hell, it doesn't even have to be slightly askew. Your Tremere could be an absolutely avid physicist, could be a completely committed anthropologist. Your Tremere could be an antiques dealer who is incredibly obsessed with finding this antique from this particular era with these markings on the side. By giving your Tremere a sphere interest like this, you're moving away from Tremere as blood magician, as another stereotype that clan becomes, where it's just all about the discipline and not about the character. Your character's interest reinforces the idea that the Tremere as a clan are intellectual first, but it gives a reason potentially for why you were embraced, because you are so obsessed with this one thing. And remember, it doesn't have to be the academic skill or the occult skill or theology or whichever edition you're playing in. This could be any of your skills, talents, or knowledges. You are an expert in this, therefore a Tremere said, we need this one in our sanctuary, our chantry, what have you. So, that's the first thing. Find an interest. Your Tremere is absolutely brilliant at it, or at least very committed to it. Next up, how to play a Tremere. I think having a streak of paranoia is a good idea, because the way the setting positions the Tremere is most people dislike or distrust them. So having a healthy paranoia isn't necessarily a bad thing for a Tremere to exhibit. Hell, they might keep the paranoia to themselves, but having it present in your character is a good way to go. I suggest their interactions with their own clan are something you could play up as a Tremere player too. How does the Tremere see the rest of their chantry or chancery, or more broadly, their pyramid, if they're even aware of the pyramid? Keep in mind that just because the Tremere are a clan that's in the know doesn't mean they know everything about vampire existence. And I've seen a lot of people play Tremere like that because they're the experts, they know all of the lore. It's better to, again, have that interest restricted, because that provides a flaw. It's more interesting to have gaps in your knowledge. If you're playing a walking encyclopedia, that's less interesting. So have in mind your relationship with your local chantry. What's the relationship with your sire? What's your relationship with the elders in your chantry? What is your rank in the chantry? Presumably, if you're playing at fledgling or neonate tier of play, you're probably quite low down. You're some kind of novice. Do you aspire to rise within the chantry, or are your interests more farther afield than that? Was your embrace something that you desired, that you see as a good thing, or has it taken away from the thing that made you who you were? Take an archaeologist, for example. It's a very difficult proposition to perform good archaeology at night time. So, I mean, you can put floodlights over a field, but there's nothing quite like daylight. And your Tremere, the reason they were embraced, the reason they were brought in, their academic knowledge, suddenly is going to, where it was growing like this before, is now going to be growing slowly, because you don't have access to all the same resources and people as you did when you were able to walk in the daytime. It's one of the curses of any vampire, but especially the Tremere, where they need access at all times to learn the things they need. Not everything is in writing. Sometimes you need to speak to people. Sometimes you need to interrogate people. Sometimes you need to go to places and examine them. I think when you're playing a Tremere, the thing you shouldn't be worried about, at least from my perspective, is what the storyteller has in mind in terms of relationships with Tzimisce, Banu Hakim, and Salubri. Those are the three clans that tend to have real beefs with the Tremere for one reason or another. And I think if you overly focus on that kind of thing, you're going to lose sight of the character you are playing. And so far, what have we built? We have built a character who has a core interest that you've got 4 or 5 dots in, if you want to get mechanical about it. You have a character who is brought into a cult-like pyramid structure and may or may not have a good relationship with it. You've got a character where you've considered their relationship with that pyramid and whether it extends beyond it. You've got a character with regrets because you can no longer practice your interest with quite as much efficacy, quite as much skill as one used to. Now, this finally takes us to, well, we got to our paranoia as well, of course. You have a fear of how others judge you, because you will have heard. I can well imagine that when a Tremere is embraced, the first thing they are told when they taste that vitae is, don't trust anyone except for other members of the pyramid. Now, that isn't necessarily going to resound with everyone. It's not going to resonate with every single Tremere, but for some it will, especially with the power of the blood bond at the same time. So, with that, you're going to have a very interesting relationship not only with your sire and your mentors, but also with other kindred, including those in your coterie. But you want to avoid, and this is the one thing I really want to get onto, the fact that the Tremere may well be other. They may well be paranoid and suspicious about everyone else and their motives. They may well be power hungry or interested in something arcane and weird. But you, Tremere player, need to find a reason that your Tremere sticks with these kindred beyond simple mercenary need. Because if you just go for these vampires offer me protection, you're not going to have much fun. You're not going to develop much character, and you're not going to develop much of a relationship with your coterie mates. And when they meet final death, you'll probably stiffly shrug like the corpse you are and say, well, I can always hire more. That sounds fun on paper, and it might be fun for a couple of sessions, but when you start running whole chronicles, if you have no personal relationship with these characters that you're playing with, they're going to have the same reaction to you, and they will leave you to die. Therefore, find a reason that your character bonds with others. It's a very important thing, and something a lot of Tremere players have a tendency to miss. One of the big failings of the Tremere stereotype is that idea that the Tremere go to the chantry before they go to the coterie. You are going to speak to your mentors, your apprentices, and so on before you're going to speak to your associates. Again, that is brilliant for narrative. It works very well in novels, but in role-playing games, that basically means that while your Brujah, your Ventru, and your Toreador are going to be fighting among each other, chatting among each other, helping each other out, whether it's to do something mundane like save a touchstone in distress, find a way to pay the rent, pull a heist on this bank that's run by some La Sombra in the city, you are going to be interacting with the storyteller more than you're interacting with the rest of the group. In some mediums, that's fine, but I would suggest that that's something you want to move away from as the game goes on. So to go back to that conflict, the idea of seeing the group as mercenaries, maybe the Tremere sees them that way for the first 2 sessions, but then they start developing a relationship. You've seen this kind of thing, I'm sure, in a lot of TV shows, where at first the boss is hard-bitten and has no trust in these new recruits or something like that, but mellows and realizes these are the only vampires who know me. Now, you could apply that to any kindred character, but the Tremere in particular, because they're so damn insular. The Hakata as well, to an extent, and even the Nosferatu, but the Tremere are very much on those lines. So the last thing I want to talk about is blood magic. Because I suppose it should be the first thing that we talk about. I've encountered quite a lot of storytellers who don't like Tremere because the Tremere have a way of breaking games with their thaumaturgy. They have a greater scope of powers, not so much so in V5, but certainly in previous editions, than any other vampire. And what's more, it's often quite cheap to increase the power rating of your discipline, your thaumaturgy paths. And this can be a bit of a pain. Tremere can attract players who are, by the old definition, munchkins. You go for a Tremere because you want to exalt in power rather than play a game of personal horror. Now, there's plenty of vampire power trip games you can play, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that's the setup. But if you're playing a game of personal horror, just committing to making your power levels go up and blood bonding everyone around you constantly is just going to upset people. It's just going to piss people off. I really encourage you, Antonio, because you're the one who asked for this video, but anyone who wants to play a Tremere, think outside the discipline box, please. That box will always be there. You can always put points in it, but think about what it means when you are putting those dots in your disciplines. Does it mean you've been spending time in the chantry? Does it mean you found a occult tome of forbidden lore that's allowed you to learn something? Add story to why that's going up, but also increase your backgrounds, increase your skills, talents, and knowledges, increase your attributes. Your virtues, I mean, that's something everyone always forgets and, of course, aren't present in V5, but your humanity, that sort of thing. think about how your experience can make your character more interesting instead of just more powerful. And all of a sudden, your Tremere is going to become a really interesting character because they are not going to be like every Tremere stereotype that's ever existed. Wizard that joins the party, casts spells, makes people's blood boil, and then fucks off back to the Chantry to spend time reading books. Doesn't sound very interesting. So, what I would like to know from you, the viewers, is how have you played an interesting Tremere? And what I would like to hear is people who've played interesting Tremere that aren't involved in Tremere metaplot shenanigans. So with the Salubri, with the Zimishi, with the Banu Hakim. I want to find out your interesting Tremere stories that have you interacting with the coterie. I mentioned briefly an all Tremere coterie, and I ran an all Tremere chronicle for some people who supported my Patreon. And it was a Dark Ages chronicle where everyone in the coterie was basically storming Azimishi Castle for one reason or another. And they were all children or childer or grandchilder of the founding clan members of the Tremere. So you had a descendant of Goratrix, Etrius, and Meerlinda, I think. And in fact, I think there was one who was descended specifically from Tremere as well. And it was a really interesting one because you can throw a lot of the advice I've just given out the window when it's all Tremere. This will allow you to really involve yourself in the meta plot because next to the Giovanni or Hecata, the Tremere are the clan with the most embedded reason for being involved in meta plot things. They are effectively a herald of Gehenna. Their existence is. While the Hecata have all of the Giovanni saga, Cappadocius, the destruction of a clan, and of course they have got more books written about them specifically than any other clan. The Tremere, one could argue, are central players in all of the Transylvania chronicles, and of course all of the stuff with Sorlot and so on is very Tremere focused. So if that's something that really interests you, I'd recommend storytellers give an all Tremere Chronicle a go. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it, and you should never feel afraid of playing a game which has repeats of the same clan in it. I think that can make for really interesting roleplay because then you can have inter-clan squabbling or within one clan. My sire says this, or two child of the same sire is a really interesting way to go. And it then encourages people to play different kinds of Tremere. From a power level, maybe they're all focused on a different path. I mean, that's the most boring way of doing it, but yeah, you could do that. I'm Levenbolt, I'm Blood, or Vitae, I'm Inferno Regnum, or whatever the hell it's called. And that's one aspect, but then you can get into, if you want to keep it purely mechanical, my Tremere is more physically focused. Yes, I'm a Tremere, but my main job is to bodyguard the rest of you with a sword or gun, depending on the era. You could have my Tremere is a carouser. I convince dealers, archaeologists, experts on antiquities to part with their knowledge so that I can pass it on to those who will use it better. And of course you have your mental focused Tremere. They don't all have to be bookish sorts. Rather, they can still be power hungry. They can still be incredibly obsessive. And yes, you can have the Tremere, the Blood Magus, who is obsessed with nothing but increasing their discipline rating. But try not to play that Tremere. I don't think that's a very interesting Tremere. Anyway, that's a very rambling video, but you asked for it. You wanted a rambling video about how to play a Tremere. I've given you some examples for how to create an interesting one and how to play them. I hope you have a lot of fun with that. In terms of our sorcerers in Curseborn, well, we have our Reeves if you're interested in blood sorcery, and you have our Premier who, if you're interested in things like obsession with reputation and popularity. Our sorcerers do also deal in blood magic, and indeed so do some of our Hungry in Curseborn. There is an entire practice dedicated to the manipulation of blood. So if that is something that appeals to you, If you like that cultish pyramid scheme, family-like atmosphere, you can get an awful lot of that in Curseborn. So I recommend checking it out, which I've linked below. I'm going to keep mentioning it because we want this Kickstarter to do as well as possible. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.